Good afternoon. We're here on the 30th of November 2015. I'm with Gary Gluckman. We are doing a Roots to Boots interview for the Dallas Historical Society. Gary, first I'd like to ask you if you can tell me what you know about the history of your grandparents or great-grandparents, if that be the case, who came from Europe or those parts to South Africa as the beginning part of your family history.
Well, I know very little of my great-grandparents, but I know quite an extensive history, as best as I can recollect, of my grandparents, with whom I was very, very close with.
Where did they come from?
They came from a little town called Zaga in Lithuania, and they both lived there in that town but didn't actually know one another in that town when they lived there. My grandfather immigrated from Lithuania when he was 10 years old, and he went with his father to South Africa.
What year was that, do you know?
He was born at 1918, so it must have been 1928, I believe. 28? No, I believe he was born in 28. Wait, let me just work this backwards. So 28, 38. He left when he was 10. I'm not sure if he was born in 18 or 28. But if he was born in 18, it was 28, and he stayed there about 10 years. Yeah, I believe he was born in 18, immigrated at 28 with his father, with the intent of bringing their mother and their remaining siblings over one at a time as they could afford to. He then, my grandfather was in Jewish theatre all his life, and he was a very good storyteller, and he would tell us, I had a sister with whom passed away, and he would tell us on Friday nights at our Shabbos table the story of his life, because he was very proud of having done what he did and having left and brought my grandmother over. And so he told us that when he was 10 years old, he took his friend down the road in the village to a house that there lived 4 daughters. The youngest of the daughters' name was Crystal. He had never said a word to her, but he always felt that he was going to marry that girl. And he told his friend, he said, I'm leaving for South Africa, but I'm going to marry this girl one day. And he left the next day. And from the moment he left, he wrote her letters for years and years and years. And he asked her one day if she would like for him to put in papers for her in South Africa, for her to come and be with him. And she said yes. And this was before the war broke out. It was probably 38 or 39. And they said yes. And it took, obviously, takes a long time. Letters, boats. And for years and years, they communicated. And in the interim, war broke out. And Pretoria, which is the capital of South Africa, sent him a letter saying, look, war's broken out now, and would you like us to continue to process these papers for Crystal? And he said, yes, definitely, please process these papers. In the interim, as my grandmother has told me, she received these papers, and on one day, she said goodbye to her parents and all her sisters, not knowing if she'd ever see them again. She had to cross Nazi Europe to get to a boat in Italy to take her to South Africa. The journey was almost impossible because ships were being sunk by German submarines all the time. And the fact that she had to cross Nazi Europe to get to Italy was a journey all of its own. But I always wondered to myself what kind of courage a 16-year-old little girl would have to say goodbye to her parents and her siblings and walk out that door. Not knowing if she'd ever come back and see them. She was spat on, she was kicked around, she was abused, she was swore at, she was treated in the worst way possible. But not one time did she ever think about turning around, which I feel like would have been the easiest thing to do. She told me once that she was in a train station going on her way to Italy, and a nice gentleman walked up to her and said, she saw she had a lot of bags, and he said, "Can I help you carry your bags?" And she said, "Oh yes, thank you, that would be really nice." And he picked them up, and he said to her, "By the way," to use her word, she said, "Something Juden, are you a Jew?" And she said, "Yes, I'm a Jew." And he threw her bags down, he said, "Carry your own damn bags." And she picked her bags up and she carried on. I don't know how, she got on the boat and she made it to South Africa. That was the first time my grandparents had actually met. Is when my grandfather went to meet her in Durban when she came off the boat. Neither one of them could speak English. At the time, all they spoke was Yiddish. My grandfather was fluent in Yiddish, Hebrew, at that time, Russian or whatever the language was over there. And they started life together. And they went from not having anything to having a very large and successful business, employing hundreds of people, yet having no education. And the one, they were married 63 years. They immigrated when they were 80 years old. They came to Dallas. They were both buried in Dallas. And there was only one thing that my grandfather cared about in his whole life, and that was family. And my grandmother. He was more outgoing and jokey and had a great sense of humour, and she was more reserved because of situations. Of course, her family had perished, or had all perished in the Holocaust, except for one sister whom she only found in 1958, who was living in New York at the time. And they made a trip over to New York. As soon as they found out her sister was alive, they made a trip over there, and they went there as often as they could, and she died. A few years later, she had some illnesses. But if I could sum up my grandparents in one word, it would be family.
Well, was this your mother's parents or your
Yes,
father's?
my mother's parents. My father's parents were came from England, but they were in South Africa way before the Second World War. There's a lot more behind that, but that's the basic story of my grandparents. I always tell my children, whenever they feel like they can't do something, that they should never forget that the blood that runs through their veins is the same blood that ran through their great-grandmother's veins. And anything that they think they can't achieve, or however tough it is, pales in comparison to what that lady went through. When I immigrated to the United States, my grandmother came to visit me once, and we went for lunch and we stayed for hours, and she shared with me for the first time a lot of these stories. And I think we left the restaurant at 5:30 and we got there at 1 o'clock, and we just sat, and it was unlike her to speak, but I think because I was living so far away, she wanted to share stuff, and I just sat and listened and listened.
So on your mother's side of the family, where were your grandparents living? What city were they living in where they had this business?
They lived in Johannesburg, but my grandfather's business, they started out as being tailors for people, and eventually they had their own factory making trousers and clothes for the retail industry in South Africa, which was in a little town in South Africa called Villiers, which was a very Afrikaans town, which would be and my grandfather actually became, firstly he mastered the Afrikaans language. He wrote many articles for Jewish publications, many of which I have. He was what was the main character in Fiddler in the Roof? Anyway, he was that guy in Jewish theatre. And that's where they had their business. It was about an hour and a half outside of Johannesburg. And my grandfather actually lived there from Monday to Friday. He came home on Shabbos. And he stayed till Sunday. And eventually he retired and he sold the business. No, he didn't. He did not sell the business. He closed the business and he paid everyone what he owed them. And he came to live here because he wanted to be close with his family.
And your mother's parents, they were, you say they were from England?
My father's.
I mean, your father's parents were from England. And what city did they live in?
Johannesburg.
They lived in Johannesburg. And what business were they in?
You know, I don't really know. We were not super close with them. My father had an okay relationship with them, but they were not like my other grandparents. Okay. Which is not to say there was anything wrong with them. They were just different.
So, your mother's parents, they lived in this small town, and how many children were in the family?
On my mother's mother or my mother's father?
Your mother had how many siblings?
One.
She had one sibling. Okay.
He now lives in Israel.
He lives in Israel. Okay. And then...
that would be my uncle.
That would be your uncle, lives in Israel.
And he has 3 children.
And where in Israel does he live?
Haifa.
Okay. What brought you to Dallas?
I get asked that question a lot, and the way I answer it is 2 ways. Firstly, I came here because I knew somebody who lived here.
Can I ask you who that was?
Those were the Simpsons. Alec and Alona Simpson, and they had 4 sons. They still have 4 sons. Alec has since passed away. And their 4 sons lived here, Stephen, Sean, Stuart and Shannon. And in South Africa, I was friendly with the brothers. So when I decided to come to the United States, I came to visit them. But that is why I came to Dallas specifically. But I always say that the reason it is very difficult for people who are not American to understand the magnetism this country has on people who live outside of it. It is very difficult to understand. There is only one America, and most people want to come to America, is my belief.
Tell me a little bit before we talk about your coming here, what your life was like as a child in South Africa.
I really had a wonderful childhood. My parents were great parents. My grandparents were always around. They were great grandparents. We were not particularly wealthy, but we were not particularly short of anything. We had a wonderful life in South Africa. And
did you have a Jewish education or a public education?
I had a Jewish education up until, which would be the equivalent of probably 14, maybe 8th grade, and then I went to public school.
And were you living in the small town at that time?
None of us lived in the small town. We all lived in Johannesburg.
Oh, you lived in Johannesburg.
Only my grandfather commuted to the town where his factory was.
Okay, so you were living in Johannesburg as a child?
Yes.
Okay. And you went to a Jewish school and then...
King David.
To King David. I've heard many things about King David School. Okay. And then you went to public school after that?
Yes.
And did you get a higher education?
I did not.
Did not. Okay. So then at some point you decided to come here and you had friends here, and how did you pick Dallas? You must have known people who had moved other places.
The Simpsons were probably the people I was most comfortable coming to and being with, even though I knew other people.
Did you have a trade at the time?
Did I have what?
A trade? I mean, did you have a profession? What was your profession?
After high school, military service was mandatory in South Africa. I did my military service, and after that I did an electrical trade. So I was an electrician at the time. I came here and I was fortunate enough to be employed by an electrician, and that's how I kind of got a taste of what it's like working and living in the United States. The gentleman that employed me, his name was Stephen Cohen, and he was also from South Africa. And I'd never particularly enjoyed the work, but I was always grateful for it because it gave me an opportunity, as I said, to taste what it's like to live in this great country. And it's also in South Africa, we come from a tropical climate, and Texas is, as we all know, is boiling hot in summer, and having to get into attics and fix stuff up in the attics during summer. I went through that for a few weeks and I started figuring out this is not going to work for me.
So what did you decide to do?
So I put some feelers out about other opportunities, and I got a job in Houston with a family, friends, Gordon, they were the Sack family, and their son David had a business in Houston, and they had immigrated maybe 25 or 30 years ago, back when there were, the riots in South Africa, and they had decided to leave. And so they'd been here a long time, and David offered me some employment, and his company sponsored me, and that is how I became legal in the United States. In addition to that, I learned the business he was in Houston, and decided to come back to Dallas because I had more close family type friends over here. And I came back here and opened the same business that I was working for in Houston over here.
What type of business?
That was in 1993. I still own that business. I still run that business today.
Tell me about that business.
And it's called the Grocery Clearance Center. And what we do is we purchase all types of grocery products that, for whatever reason, the big chains and distribution centers and manufacturers don't use for whatever reason. It can be damaged, it can be close dated, it could be discontinued. We don't really know the reasons, but those are the reasons. And we buy up this product and resell it to the public at 50%.
I've been in your store. Now I recognize. Now I know
Really?
why I recognize you. Yes.
Okay, so but now, I don't know how long ago you were there, but we've moved. We had 2 stores for quite some time, and then we shuttered the original location. Now we just have a much larger location.
So where is the store now? Because I was in the one that was in South Dallas.
It's still there, but it's in a much bigger location. We bought a old abandoned strip center in Oak Cliff, and we revitalized the strip center with using our store as the anchor.
All right, so I'll have to go on the web to get the new address. My neighbor across the street, she and I have gone there many, many times, loaded up the car.
Oh, excellent.
So that's funny because every time I come down to do one of these interviews, I kind of joke with Deborah about, I know I'm going to find some kind of a connection with everyone I interview.
That's funny.
And now I realize who you are, so that's the connection. Yes, I've been in your business many times.
That's strange, but thank you.
Yeah, I think I even have the punch card.
Oh, you do?
Yeah,
Okay,
I think so.
Well, the punch card was actually only started when we opened the second location, so you could have already been to that one.
Uh-huh. The second location.
Yeah.
I never knew that there were 2.
Yeah.
But you say you've opened up, but you've done something with that location?
Yeah, we have a big walk-in cooler now where we
Oh.
have a lot of fruit and vegetables where we never had
wonderful.
that before.
Well, I'll have to make my way down.
It's definitely worth the trip.
I know, it's always been worth the trip.
That's funny.
So does your wife work in the business
No,
with you?
my wife was born to be a mother. That's what that's in her DNA,
Uh-huh.
and she's good at it.
Yeah. So aside from your very successful business and being involved with that and expanding it, are there any other things that you're involved with here in Dallas in the Jewish community?
No, not really.
Are you involved with the Hebrew Order of David?
No. We belong to Chabad of Plano,
Mm-hmm.
and Bonita's pretty active with the events and stuff that goes on there, and
Mm-hmm.
so that's sort of where our time goes.
Mm-hmm. So, when you came to Dallas, how did you find it in terms of integrating into the community? Obviously, you had these close friends, but what about the rest of the integration process? Was it easy for you? Was it difficult?
I feel like even to this day, a lot of people comment on what a great community we have here. And when I say a lot of people comment, I have friends that may come visit me from Arizona or from Maryland or from different parts of the country. And when they come here and they're sort of exposed to the type of community we have here, they always leave going, this is an incredible community you have here. Initially, in the beginning of years, before I met Bonita and before I had kids, there wasn't a whole lot of integration for me. I really stuck with the people I knew, and I didn't really venture out to, let's say, the JCC or Jewish events like that. Not for any reason other than I felt like I had what I needed, you know. And I feel like there's a lot of people that arrive in a city that do come here because they don't have maybe the sort of friends that I had. And, you know, that's not a judgment. I'm just saying at that time I didn't feel the need to reach out. And I was working day and night. I mean, you know what it takes to open and sustain a business today. And so the little time I had, I spent with my friends. And, you know, we had Shabbos at their mom's house, and we were always... There was always something going on. Once I met Bonita, by the way, Peter's brother, Neil, introduced me to Bonita. And so, and I'm still very friendly with Neil. I'm very fond of him. He's a great guy. And so once I met Bonita, then sort of things, you know, once you get married, you settle down, you have kids.
Right.
That's how our lives began to expand a little bit.
If there was something that you wanted to say to your children, in terms of what you would leave them as a verbal legacy, what would that be?
I feel like I try to do that every day. I don't feel like I'm not saying anything to them that I wouldn't say now, that I haven't already said. There's nothing I could put on this video that they didn't already know that I said. And the only thing that I always say is I try to have them remember the journey their grandmother took, because to me, that is everything. If they can remember that, their lives will be easier.
Thank you, Gary. This has been really a very touching interview. I thank you so much for sharing your story, and especially the parts about your grandmother, but also the whole story. I think is very meaningful, and I think you've done a great service to yourself, to the community, and to your family. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for being persistent in getting us to come in.
Absolutely, that's my job. I love it. Thanks. Thank you.